Intentional randomness. It is a concept of making each random event in your game adhere to your core design pillars in a meaningful way. Depending on the game's vision, some developers might want to have truly random systems that could potentially affect the fun a player is having if the result is not to their favor. Personally, I disagree with such an approach, as I don't think punishing a player for something they have no control over is a good practice, especially if that ties into the core game experience and originates from core features. Randomness in games comes in many forms, from random loot, which is my personal favorite, to random critical hits, random encounters, procedurally generated room layouts, a random sequence of enemy attack patterns, to random card packs for trading card games like Hearthstone or Gwent. Some sort of randomness exists in almost all games, but what separates intentional randomness from bad randomness, or what players usually dub as bad RNG, lies in the purpose of its usage. The trick to creating meaningful and intentional randomness lies in the expected result you tie it to. If the source of randomness in your game is part of the core experience, like the enemy attack pattern of a boss in Dark Souls or Elden Ring, where the player expects a good but fair challenge, it should follow some basic rules. The sequence of attacks could, in essence, be completely random and not tied to direct responses to a player's behavior, but the actual attacks should not. You shouldn't punish your players for learning the attack patterns of a boss. For example, recognizing an incoming attack from a telegraphed animation and managing to avoid it. But you can most certainly amp the difficulty up by not having a consistent sequence of attacks, keeping that part, in essence, random. This means that if the player is unlucky, they can get a pretty difficult set of attacks to avoid, but they're still able to overcome the challenge if they're skilled enough. If a player is considered lucky and they get an easier attack sequence to play around, then that doesn't undermine the first player, it just makes this one feel more rewarded. Now imagine a scenario where the boss starts acting completely different from your previous attempts without any indication as to why. Imagine that during your first 3 attempts, the boss is holding a massive sword, and you started learning his attack patterns and you're progressing the fight. Now imagine during your 4th attempt, the boss is now suddenly holding a bow with a completely different moveset. You pull the boss, you fight a bit, you learn some of his moves, then die. So you go back on the next pull, and now he's back to holding a sword, seemingly making his starting state random. You would wonder, can he have more weapons? What influences it? I would expect a good number of players to be confused, and probably after a few attempts and seeing that the starting state is a bit random or maybe completely random, I see them starting the fight and dying on purpose so they can keep resetting the boss until they get the variation they found easier. Now, of course, the above example can definitely work, and it could make a pretty interesting boss fight, assuming that the boss is guaranteed to switch to all those weapons at some point during the fight. In which situation, you as a player would be more prepared if you went through and tried fighting him no matter what variation he spawned with. If, however, the boss spawns with a weapon and he sticks with it for the duration of the fight, players would most likely keep resetting until they get their desired result, which probably goes against your intention as a designer. If the source of randomness in your game is still part of the core experience, but only as a zero-cost reward incentive to the player, like the loot system in Diablo, you can have way more bad results without harming the player's enjoyment, as this only enhances the feeling of getting good results in your random system. It's not really punishing to not get a legendary item from a pack of rare mobs you kill. Maybe disappointing, but not punishing. However, it is counterintuitive having to constantly die and reset an encounter to get a variation or outcome that is easier for you to fight. Alternatively, randomness can also be something that steers away from your core game experience, like shiny Pokemon in the Pokemon games. It is definitely not punishing to not find a shiny Pokemon during your playthrough, but it's a great feeling when you do. In essence, if you want to achieve what I call intentional randomness, try to make sure that when bad RNG lands, your players don't feel cheated out or that the game is unfair. Rather, make that bad outcome enhance the feeling of a good outcome later on. Do not punish your players with systems they don't have an influence on, and definitely do not punish your players with outcomes that even the most skilled can't overcome.